Welcome back to r/maliciouscompliance. In this Reddit story, 20 years ago my parents tried to force me into marriage to pay off my dad's gambling debt. Last year they showed up at my house asking for $50,000 just because we are family. Let's dive right into the story. And the first one is titled r/maliciouscompliance. Parents tried to steal my savings after 20 years of no contact. So 20 years ago I cut all contact with both my parents. Not because of some petty argument, but because they literally tried to sell me into marriage. When I was in my early 20s, fresh out of college, my father came to me with what he called the opportunity of a lifetime. It turns out he had gotten himself deep into gambling debt, serious money, the kind where loan sharks start making threats. He'd been hiding it for years, refinancing the house, maxing out cards, the whole spiral, so he made a deal with some business associate who had connections to make his debt disappear. This associate had a son around my age who could not get a date on his own, so they worked out an arrangement. I would marry this guy, and in exchange the associate would pay off all my father's debts and invest in their business venture. Everyone would be happy, well, except me, obviously. I was not consulted. The first I heard of it was when my father sat me down and laid out the whole plan like it was decided already. My mother was there too, sitting on the couch, nodding along. That part still gets me. My own mother was completely on board with this insanity. When I said no, they both turned on me. My father yelled about ingratitude and sacrifice, but my mother was worse. She got cold and quiet, which was somehow more terrifying. She told me that I was selfish and naive and that this was how families worked, that sacrifices had to be made. She said her generation understood duty and mine was too entitled to understand real family loyalty. I asked her point blank if she was serious, telling me to marry a stranger to pay off my dad's gambling debt. She then said it was not a stranger, that we had met the son at family gatherings, as if that made it better. Then she dropped the real bomb: if I didn't do this, I was on my own. No more family support, nothing. Either be a real member of this family or leave and never come back. My father backed her up and got aggressive. He tried every single manipulation tactic possible. He cried about losing the house, being homeless, that I was destroying the family. He brought up every time he had done anything for me, like presenting an itemized bill. He told me the associate's son was a good match, that I should be grateful someone from a wealthy family would marry me at all. When guilt did not work, he got nasty. He said my education made me stuck up, that I'd come crawling back when I couldn't make it alone, and then he told me the wedding was already being planned for 3 months out and that deposits had been made. He said I was doing this whether I liked it or not. That's when I knew I had to get out completely. I told them no. My father actually tried to physically block the door, grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. My mother just watched, arms crossed like she approved of it. I shoved past him and ran to my car while he banged on the windows yelling. I drove to a friend's house, filed a police report about the assault, and got a restraining order. Then I started cutting them off completely. My mother called once, about a week later, and I thought maybe she would come to her senses. However, instead she told me I had humiliated the family and that the associate had backed out because of the police involvement and that my father had lost everything because of me. She blamed me for all of it. I asked if she understood what they'd done wrong. She said I was too young and stupid to understand the real world. Then she said she had wished she had never had me, that I'd been nothing but a burden and disappointment, and as far as she was concerned, she did not have a child anymore. She hung up. That was the last time I ever spoke to her, and that was 20 years ago. I blocked both their numbers, moved to a different city, and started over. It was not easy cutting off your own family, but it was necessary. Some relatives tried to guilt me over the years, but I shut that down. Anyone who sided with them got cut off too. Over the next 20 years I built a good life, I worked hard, made smart investments, and started my own consulting business, and did well financially. Comfortable enough to own my home outright, have healthy retirement accounts, afford nice vacations, and so on. I got married to someone I actually chose, had kids, and created the stable family life I never had growing up. I did keep a low profile on social media, but a few years ago I accepted a connection request from a distant cousin. I posted occasionally about work achievements or family trips, nothing too personal, but enough that someone paying attention could see that I was doing well. Well, fast forward to about 6 months ago, my doorbell rings. Security camera shows an older man I barely recognized, my father. He had aged a lot, looked rough, and my blood pressure spiked. My spouse asked if I was okay because I'd gone white. I seriously considered not answering, but he had seen that I owned this house. If he had found me after 20 years, he was not leaving. I told my spouse to take the kids upstairs and call the cops if needed. I answered but stepped outside and closed the door. He was not getting in my house. The conversation started predictably. Sorry, mistakes, thought about me every day, changed, man, therapy, religion, and so on. All the right words about taking responsibility. I stood there with my arms crossed and said, "What do you want?" He looked hurt, played the wounded father, but I stared until he dropped it. And then came the real reasons. Business opportunity, guaranteed investment, revolutionary product, just needed seed money, $50,000. Once it took off, we would both make a fortune. I actually laughed in his face. After 20 years, after trying to sell me into marriage, after my mother telling me she wished I'd never been born, he shows up asking for money. The audacity was almost impressive. He got defensive and started the guilt trip. He raised me. He and my mom sacrificed everything. I owed them. The least I could do was help him achieve his dreams. A good child would want to help their parent. So this is where I should have slammed the door. But something in his entitled attitude made me snap. Not angrily, but calculatingly, an idea formed. I asked how much. He perked up immediately. 50,000. Just 50 grand for a founding investor position. Triple the money within 2 years guaranteed. I made a show of thinking about it, asked about details, and he gave vague answers about proprietary technology and NDAs. Red flag, but I was committed to my plan. Then I surprised him. Okay, I'll do it. His face lit up like Christmas. He tried to hug me, rambling about rebuilding our relationship, a new beginning. I stepped back and hit him with conditions. I told him I had learned a lot about business. If I was investing 50K, we were doing this properly. Legal contracts, official agreements, proper documentation, not just some handshake deal or casual family arrangement, but he immediately backpedaled. Not necessary. We are family. Keep it simple. Classic scam signals, but I held firm. These were my terms, non-negotiable. Either we do this right with lawyers or he leaves and we never speak again. I watched him struggle, calculating whether he could still scam me with legal paperwork involved. And well, the greed won. He agreed. I told him to give me the business details, names, documentation, and so on, and he fumbled but provided vague info, promised more details. I said fine, my lawyer would draw up paperwork, and he asked when he would get the money. Not until contracts were signed and everything documented. He didn't like that, but agreed. Next day, I contacted my lawyer and was completely honest about who my father was, the arranged marriage 20 years ago, and why I believed this was a scam too. My lawyer smiled and said we could structure this to protect me. If it was a scam or my father defaulted, I would be fully protected and then some. Over the next week, my lawyer drafted an ironclad contract, beautiful in its thoroughness. The $50,000 was structured as a secured investment loan with my father as personal guarantor, basically a convertible note that would either convert to equity if the business succeeded or be repaid as a loan if it failed. The contract required collateral for the full amount plus potential returns. Since he claimed the investment would triple, collateral needed to cover $150,000. He owned a house worth about $180,000, so that was perfect. First, we positioned a lien on his house. If he defaulted or the business didn't materialize, I could foreclose on his house. But wait, there's even more. Co-signers required. Since my father was big on family loyalty, I insisted 2 of his siblings co-sign too. Jointly liable if he defaulted, strict repayment terms, if the investment didn't return principal plus 20% within 2 years, entire amount plus penalties became immediately due. Clauses about fraudulent misrepresentation too. Also, if the business opportunity didn't exist as described, that constituted fraud and triggered immediate default. Harsh penalties including immediate foreclosure and potential criminal referral. My lawyer added protective clauses for auditing rights, quarterly financial reporting, restrictions on money use and provisions letting me call the loan anytime if my investment seemed at risk. When we finished reviewing the contract, my lawyer asked if I was sure. Based on what I told him, 99% chance this was a scam and I would end up foreclosing on my dad's home. He wanted to make sure I was prepared for that though, and the family drama. I told him I was absolutely sure my father showed up after 20 years, not to apologize, but to exploit me for money. He tried to guilt me using the same sacrifices he had thrown in my face during the arranged marriage disaster. If this was legitimate, the contract protected both of us. But if he was trying to scam me, he deserved what was coming. The signing meeting was 2 weeks later, and my father showed up with 2 of his brothers who I hadn't seen since I was a kid. They looked uncomfortable. My father had probably fed them some story where I was the bad guy. We met in a conference room at my lawyer's office. My lawyer, a notary, and I had offered to pay for a second attorney to independently represent my father's interests. He'd be hired by my dad, but I would cover fees. Strategic. I wanted no one claiming that he didn't understand what he was signing here. My father came in all smiles, ready to collect his 50K. Then he saw the 40-page contract. His smile faltered, but he joked about lawyers making things complicated. We sat down and my lawyer walked through every clause. Personal guarantee, convertible note structure, house lien, co-signers, repayment terms, fraud provisions. With each section, my father looked more uncomfortable. His brothers looked panicked, especially realizing they would lose their own assets if he defaulted. My father tried to push back. He said this was all too complicated, too formal, that we didn't need all these protections between family. He looked at me and asked, couldn't we just do this on a handshake, the way family should? I looked him dead in the eye and said no. I told him that when he showed up at my house asking for my money, he had said I owed him for raising me. He had said that a good child helps their parent achieve their dreams, and well, I was helping him. I was investing in his guaranteed business opportunity, exactly like he had asked. These were simply the standard terms for any business investment of this size. If the opportunity was as solid as he claimed, he had nothing to worry about. The contract was there to protect both of us. His lawyer, the one I had paid for to represent him, actually advised him not to sign. He said the terms were heavily weighted in my favor and that my father should seek other funding sources, but my father was in too deep now. He needed that money and he probably figured he could still find a way to keep it and never actually have to pay me back. Or maybe he actually believed his own lies about the business opportunity being legitimate. His brothers tried to back out of co-signing, but my father turned on them with the same guilt trip he had used on me. He reminded them of family loyalty, of all the times he had helped them over the years, of how he'd always been there for family. He laid it on really thick about how they had all grown up poor, and this was his shot at finally being successful. They caved and signed, everyone signed, and the documents were notarized. I transferred the 50K to the escrow account specified in the contract. My father walked out with his money, already talking about how this was going to change everything and how we would all be rich soon. The attorney I had hired to represent my father's interests pulled me aside as everyone was leaving. He said I seemed like a smart person and asked if I knew what I was doing, and I told him I knew exactly what I was doing. He nodded slowly, said something about being careful with family matters, and then left. I want to be clear about something though. I did not want my father's house. I did not need his house. I had my own home that I loved, and I had no desire to become a landlord or deal with a property in his city. What I wanted was justice. I wanted him to face consequences for trying to exploit me. I wanted him to learn that you cannot treat people like ATMs, especially when you abandoned any right to their loyalty decades ago when you tried to sell them to pay off gambling debts. The business opportunity, shockingly, turned out to be complete garbage. Based on the info my father had provided, I'd done my own research into this supposed revolutionary product and the people involved. It was a classic multi-level marketing scheme dressed up as a tech investment. The product was some kind of wellness supplement with exaggerated health claims and no scientific backing. The company had no real assets, no legitimate distribution channels, and the whole thing was designed to separate desperate investors from their money through a pyramid-style structure. I documented everything I found and sent it to my father with a formal notice that he had 30 days to return the principal per the fraud clause in our contract. He then called me, absolutely furious, screaming that I couldn't do this, that he had spent the money and that the business just needed more time to develop. I calmly reminded him that the contract specifically stated that misrepresenting the investment opportunity constituted fraud and triggered the immediate repayment clause. So I told him he had 30 days and then hung up. He did not have the money, of course he didn't. I had known he wouldn't. The $50,000 was gone, probably spent on debt or gambling or whatever other financial hole he had dug himself into. When the 30 days passed with no payment, I sent a default notice. Then I initiated foreclosure proceedings on his house, and that's when things got really interesting. Suddenly, I was getting calls from family members I barely knew, all telling me I could not do this, that I was heartless, and that he was my father. My uncles who had co-signed were particularly angry, threatening to sue me, saying I had tricked them. I calmly pointed out that they'd been represented by counsel when they signed, that every clause had been explained in detail, and that they had entered into a legal contract. Their anger was with my father for defaulting, not with me for enforcing the contract they had voluntarily signed. My father tried everything. He got some relatives to pool together some money, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover what he owed. The penalties and interest had pushed the total owed to well over $100,000 by that point. He tried to negotiate, offering to make monthly payments. But I refused. The contract was clear and he had had his chance to make this right. He even tried to play the victim publicly. He told everyone who would listen about how his cruel child had stolen his house, how I'd taken advantage of him, how I had manipulated him into signing a contract he didn't understand. Several people who didn't know the full story actually reached out to shame me. I responded to exactly one of these messages, laying out the complete history, how he and my mother had tried to force me into marriage to pay his debts, how my mother had told me she wished I'd never been born, how I'd cut contact for 20 years, and how he had shown up demanding money, and how I had done everything legally and transparently with lawyers present. After that, the criticism mostly died down and the foreclosure went through. And yeah guys, by the way, just to interject here at this point, do you think OP did the right thing here, or did OP go too far? Let me know in the comments about what you think, and don't forget to like the video, since that would help me tremendously. Anyway, it took about 6 months total from the default notice to actually taking possession of the house. My father tried to fight it with multiple motions and delays, but the contract was airtight and he had signed it with full knowledge and legal representation too. The judge reviewed everything and ruled in my favor, noting that the contract terms were clear and my father had been properly represented by counsel when he signed it. The day the house officially became mine, my father showed up at my doorstep again, and this time my spouse called the police before I even opened the door. He was screaming from the sidewalk about how I could not do this to him, how I was his child and I owed him, and how he had raised me and I was destroying him. I stepped outside and waited for him to run out of steam. When he finally stopped shouting, I spoke calmly. I told him that he had come to me demanding I invest in his business opportunity. He had guilt-tripped me, telling me I owed him for raising me and that a good child would help their parent achieve their dreams. I'd done exactly what he asked. I'd invested in his business opportunity. I'd structured it properly with legal protections like any smart investor would. If the business had been legitimate like he claimed, we would have both made money and everyone would be happy. The fact that it was not legitimate, that it was a scam, that was on him, not me. I told him that he had spent decades thinking he could manipulate people without consequences, and he had thought he could sell his own child into marriage, disappear for 20 years and then reappear with his hand out, expecting me to just give him money. But he'd been wrong. This was what consequences looked like. This was what happened when you treated people as marks instead of human beings. He tried the tears again, the sob story about how he had nowhere to go, how I was making him homeless. I pointed out that he had made himself homeless by trying to scam me. He had choices at every step. He could have not shown up at my house after 20 years, and he could have tried to genuinely reconnect instead of immediately asking for money. He could have been honest about whatever financial troubles he was having instead of dressing it up as a fake investment opportunity. He could have read the contract carefully and realized the risk he was taking. He could have not defaulted once the scam fell through, but every bad decision was his own. The police arrived then. They asked if I wanted to press charges for trespassing, since I told him to leave my property already. I said no, I just wanted him gone. They escorted him away, and that was the last time I saw him. I sold the house 3 months later. I did not want it or need it, and I certainly didn't want the connection to my father. I sold it at market value and netted about $160,000 after paying off what remained of my legal fees and the costs of the foreclosure. So after investing $50,000, I came out ahead by more than $110,000. I donated a good chunk of that profit to a charity that helps young people escape abusive family situations. The rest went into my kids' college funds. My father's house, the house he had tried to use as leverage to guilt me into giving him money, ended up benefiting my children and helping others in need too. A few months after everything was settled, one of my uncles who had co-signed reached out. He said he understood now why I had done what I did and that my father had finally admitted to him what had happened 20 years ago with the arranged marriage situation. He apologized for not believing me initially and for trying to pressure me to drop the foreclosure. He said my father had cost him the relationship with his other family members who had blamed him for co-signing, and he had to hire his own lawyer during the foreclosure process, which had wiped out a good chunk of his own savings. And well, I appreciated the apology, but I also pointed out that he had chosen to co-sign without really asking questions, without demanding to know why his sibling's child hadn't spoken to them in 20 years. He had chosen family loyalty without considering whether that loyalty was deserved. That was a lesson he had to learn the expensive way, so that is my story, and a lot of people in my own life have asked me if I feel guilty about what I did, about taking my father's house. And the answer is no, not even a little bit. However, now I'm curious about what Reddit has to say. Was I an a-hole for doing this? And yeah guys, let me know in the comments what you think about this. I would say OP was definitely not the a-hole, but OP was definitely very clever in regards to executing her plan. Anyway, comment number 1 said, everyone sucks here. Your parents were absolutely horrible 20 years ago, trying to force you into an arranged marriage to pay off gambling debts, which is unforgivable, and your mom's reaction was genuinely cruel. You were 100% right to go no contact, but what you did here was not justice, it was an elaborate revenge plot. You admittedly knew it was a scam, you admitted you came up with a plan to teach him a lesson, and you deliberately structured the contract to guarantee you would take his house. And yes, he was trying to scam you, but you were also deliberately setting him up to fail. You both used legal means to hurt each other. Two wrongs don't make a right, and stooping to his level of manipulation does not make you the hero of this story. You could have just said no and closed the door. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, and frankly I'm amazed at some of these YTA comments. Your parents literally tried to sell you into marriage and then disowned you when you refused. Your father showed up after 20 years of no contact asking for money, not to apologize, not to rebuild the relationship, but to immediately demand 50k for a business opportunity. You were completely transparent about the contract terms, and he had his own lawyer. Everything was legal and above board. The fact that it turned out to be a scam, shocking I know, is not your fault. You gave him exactly what he asked for, a business investment with standard protections. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and actions have consequences, and your father spent decades thinking he could manipulate people without any. You don't owe him anything, especially not after what they put you through. And yeah guys, I would say amen to that comment, but now we got comment number 3, which says YTA. Not for going no contact, not for protecting yourself, but for deliberately engaging with someone you knew was unstable and financially reckless just to set up a situation where you could crush him. You had already won by building your own life without them. When he showed up, you could have shut the door, blocked him, and maybe even warned other family members that he was running scams again. But instead, you pretended to play along, brought in lawyers, structured what was basically a loaded gun of a contract, and waited for him to pull the trigger. You keep saying, I didn't want his house and this was about justice, but everything you did was designed so that your most likely outcome was taking his house and profiting off of it. We even pulled in co-signers who were clearly being emotionally manipulated, and then calmly told them afterwards that this was a lesson they needed to learn. That does not read like neutral boundary enforcement, it reads like controlled revenge. I understand why you feel justified, but from an am I the a-hole lens, you walked past the exit ramp, no contact, no money, and chose the route where you could legally destroy him. That makes you the a-hole here. And the next one is titled, Rental car company told me where to leave my keys, and when I left them there, tried to charge me for an extra day. Posted on r/maliciouscompliance. I rented a car for 5 weeks while my car was being repaired from a car accident. The rental company had a couple great policies like no cleaning fee, no matter how gross the car was, and unlimited miles. Ideal for me, I live in the country and going anywhere is a drive. When my car was finally scheduled to be finished, a Monday evening, I called the rental car company on Sunday and asked about return details. They said return time would be 5:30 p.m. on Monday, but I could just leave it at the shop and leave the keys in the shop drop box. I said sure, and next night I went, got my car, left the keys in the box, got in my car, and check engine light is on. Damn, staff says come back tomorrow and we will fix it. I go home thinking that I'll be sitting at the shop all Tuesday because no other ride. Tuesday morning I wake up at 7 AM to the rental car company very angry and saying that they cannot get into the Dropbox shop doesn't open until 9. I tell them I just did what they said to do and they told me that they would be charging me an extra day. At that I'm furious, so I leave my house later and arrive at the shop at 8:50. However, the rental car guys are not there. I sit around, the shop opens, I grab the rental keys and give them my car. Right on time, rental car guys appear. They demand the keys and ask if I'm still getting charged for an extra day. One guy is inspecting the car while the other tells me yes, I'm getting charged an extra day. Guy inspecting it comes over and Day's car looks good, it should be ready to rent out immediately. I'd cleaned it the day before because I didn't want to be an a-hole. Well then, I refused to give him the keys. Since I'm getting charged an extra day, that means it's my car until 5:30 today, right? At that he gets nervous. Says that they need the car back. I will give you the keys now if you don't charge me an extra day, but if I'm charged an extra day, I'm just using it. He refuses to bend, so I leave. At this point, I'm petty and angry, so I go straight home. I own a farm and it has been raining like mad lately. I get to work. By the time 10 AM rolls around, the car is covered in mud. Like this black car looks painted brown. I did not trash the inside because I'm not that petty. I hop in the car and drive to the rental place. I'm pretty covered in mud at this point and I'd put trash bags on the front seat to limit it. I walk into the rental place looking like I fell into a mud pit. The guy who refused to cancel the charge looks horrified and I tell them, this car is great for mudding. I'm gonna go mudding for the rest of the day, just swinging by to ask where to put the keys at 5:30. I'm all smiles and dripping sweetness. I literally watched the life leave him, his shoulders slump and he says if I return the car now they will cancel the charge because they need to rent out the car. I give them the keys and take an Uber to the shop where my car is ready. No cleaning fee and no extra day charge. Edit, alright, might as well address the few things you're all complaining about. The Uber, I called the Uber after I walked out of the rental car place. It took half an hour to arrive. I had brought extra trash bags, so I stripped down a bit, shorts and undershirt, and put on 2 trash bags that I cut holes in, put my clothes in a bag and let the mud on my exposed body parts flake off. Did I look absolutely ridiculous? Yes. Did I get mud in some poor stranger's car? No. I didn't want to actually ruin the day for some kid getting minimum wage, that's why I only mudded the outside and that's a pretty easy clean. I did not want to wreck anyone's day, even the a-hole that charged me. My goal was to make the car messy and shocking enough to get them to not charge me, because they were desperate to get it back. If the outside is that bad, what did he do to the inside? The car was $91 a day, first 3 weeks $39 a day and then went up for last 2 weeks to $91 and my insurance didn't cover it. I was not willing to let $91 slide. The keys were left at the auto shop in the auto shop's key box. That key box was not open at 7 AM when rental car company went to get the car. When I went around 9 AM to drop my car off, the auto shop opened the box for me and gave me the rental car keys. Rental car people appeared a few minutes later. And the next one is another malicious compliance story, which is titled, My boss loves to call me at 6:15 AM to ask me if I would like to fill the shifts of the people who just called in sick. So what I described is an everyday thing. I was basically bored and frustrated, so I decided to volunteer at 3:30 AM to call the same manager to ask if they needed extra help. He of course got super pissed and tried to write me up for it. I showed the GM the timestamps of the calls I had received before. So yeah, I don't get calls anymore. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. If you want to hear more malicious compliance stories, please check out my playlist on the left and I will see you again tomorrow.